Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure of mine to check in today with a gentleman from the UK who's been prolific in his critique of what's going on in the Russian invasion of Ukraine and comparing it historically to what went on in the 1930s and 1940s. And he's written some really excellent articles and posts on this. So I thought it would be frankly imperative to check in with Mark Smallwood. Mark's got a fascinating background in addition to writing about what's going on in Ukraine. He's an elite strategy director and executive coach specializing in high value transformation, guiding professionals from competence to excellence for those committed to investing in their growth. He's right now just publishing a book in that regard. And we may do another interview at some point in time about his day job, but your incredible posts that compare what's going on in Ukraine today to what's happened in the past are really quite interesting. Mark, why are you motivated to do that, and what's your message?
Okay, well, I think I've always had a passion for history, and growing up, I understood that history is usually a matter of perspective. The old adage that history is written by the victors makes you understand that it's potentially a matter of where you stand. I also, as a youth and heading into adulthood, have a very strong disdain for what I would class as bullying behavior, whether that happens at an individual level or at a national level. And I think just seeing the appalling actions of Russia, led by Putin, as what's going on in Ukraine and what has happened previously in Syria and many other locations, it just really scratched at me. My grandfather fought in World War II, so he was a paratrooper. He fought in Holland on behalf of the Allies, was captured and spent time in a German prison camp. Father was in the police. So for me, that element of keeping in touch with what's going on in the world has always seemed really important. And I think recognizing that as it would be defined, UK, Canada, US has the first, second, third largest air forces on Earth. What they do has a big impact. And looking at the very introspective aspect of the worldview that you tend to see in many American politicians, it reminded me of what I'd learned about in my past about what had happened in the lead up and build up to World War II. And I think when you sit there and you see the blatant propaganda that is rolled out by a very effective Russian machine, I thought it was very important, particularly I think the post where we came across each other, where I put down that, the Soviets, or Russia as it is today, but the USSR began World War II on the side of Nazi Germany, which is factually accurate. They, through the pact that they sized with Molotov and Ribbentrop, they basically acted as allies and decided to carve up parts of the Baltic states and Poland. And before this, they'd invaded Finland, taken a real drubbing, but the sheer volume of people they threw at it meant that they had made headway. And the real reason for that invasion by Stalin was he didn't like the fact that the Finnish border was just 20 miles from St. Petersburg. So I think when you look at all the behaviors and you look at the dictatorial behaviors that you see around the world today, whether they're seen in someone who wants to lead a democracy, whether they're seen in, what is frankly, the Russian regime seems very much to me, it is my opinion, a criminal leadership, very much like the Nazis at the beginning of World War II, but they're very effective with propaganda. So having a strong dislike of bullies and bullying behavior, I feel that, there are things that every single one of us can do to challenge that misinformation. And for me, that is something that feels quite important. And that's why I wrote that post.
Well, there were a series of excellent posts. Thank you for doing it. Let's break it down into pieces. The first point you make is about bullies. Let me read what you wrote if I could. In the face of aggression, history has taught us a vital lesson. Dictators perceive concessions as signs of weakness, fueling their ambitions. They respond solely to strength because at heart they are cowards. This is a moment in history that demands our unyielding resolve and robust support for Ukraine, much like the Allies' stance against tyranny during World War II. You agree with that? Obviously,
I
you got to stand up to bullies.
I absolutely stand up for that. I have never, in my own personal experience or looking elsewhere, seen any concession you make to someone who is adopting a, by force or bullying attitude, that they accept that concession in the spirit in which it would be offered. I learned this throughout work. I learned this throughout life. I've learned this for the important people that are around me in my formative years. And I think when you look at world events and you see what goes on, Russia have broken every single agreement they have signed. They have used those as delaying tactics, as distracting tactics. The old joke being, a contract signed with Russia as a state is like having something on toilet paper. It's not worth the paper it's printed upon. So having observed that quite clearly, I felt it's important to call that out. And for those voices that say, yes, think of all the people that are dying, and absolutely I do. And I'm certainly not an advocate for more war. But the common thread and the similarity that you see in what is going on now with what was going on in the 1930s is impossible to ignore if you bother to learn anything about history.
So you're a Brit. Let me ask you a question, because it's something that has really wondered a lot of people, and that is, and you've made a lot of in the posts that I've read recently, comparisons between 1939 and right now, and the invasion of Poland, etc. But what about going back earlier, and Prime Minister Chamberlain, who went to Munich and believed in appeasement and that compromise would work. And are there parallels and lessons from that time? And during that time, even the vast majority of Brits, I think, would have supported Chamberlain and appeasement. And there was a lone voice, Churchill, who at the time, I believe, was arguing against appeasement and said we had to stay strong. And some people think that that the invasion of Georgia and Crimea in 2014 was similar to Austria, Czechoslovakia, and potentially 2018 when they invaded eastern Ukraine was comparable. Tell me what you think about those historical comparisons and the lesson learned by the UK and the world about Chamberlain and appeasement.
Well, I think when you try and look at any historical figure through a single lens, it's challenging. And we have the benefit of 80 plus years looking back on all of the things that went on. So Chamberlain was a product of World War I, and World War I for all of the countries involved, but particularly for the UK, was a brutal, mechanized warfare, and the sheer number of the flower of the youth of this country and many others was destroyed. So anyone who'd been through that would have a strong aversion and would be prepared to do nearly anything to avoid war. I think in the same way, most right-thinking people don't go out looking for trouble. But I think when you look at what Chamberlain did, yes, I feel there was a degree of naivety about it. But the net impact was he bought a year of peace, and during that year of peace, Britain wasn't sat on its hands. We were desperately trying to rearm. We were desperately doing a lot with our, factories, our aircraft factories, working out how to split up, investing a lot more money into the military. So whilst, yes, we could have avoided the issue if we'd stepped up to Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime back in the mid-1930s. Once we got to the point where war was going to happen because the dictator wanted to expand, Churchill definitely went and didn't cover himself with glory, but on the upside, he did buy us a little bit of time. And I think that is one of the things you need to remember. When you look at what's going on now, if I were to say, for example, the behavior in the US House of Congress, I'm not an American. You're not an American. We don't get to vote in that election, but it's such a powerful country that the choices that America makes will have a roll-on impact to all of us. And I think when you listen to what's said versus the reality, we don't want to send any more money to Ukraine. That money is actually being spent to update and put new arms into the American military, that most of that money is being spent within the US on American exports. And they then would go to Ukraine to protect that country, which has been invaded, the sovereign nation that's been invaded. 2 weeks before the news came out about the war crimes in Bucha, back, I think, in the first few months of this main invasion since 2022, a friend from Ukraine was telling me about it. And those are choices. Those are choices people make to fight a war in that way. The war would end tomorrow if Russia left. If Ukraine gives up, that country ceases to exist. And that country is a democratic country. It has its problems like all countries. There is corruption in every country. There are people who take advantage in every country. But all the arguments that are being used by the US at the moment to not arm Ukraine were exactly the same arguments that the US was using to not arm Britain back in the late 1930s.
You made a really interesting post about that as well that I found really quite fascinating. You talked about 30 officials that exhibited treacherous behavior along with Nazi interests in the United States during the late 1930s. That was really interesting. Let's take a break for some messages and come back and talk about that with Mark Smallwood in just 2 minutes. Everyone, fascinating conversation with a business executive coach from London, England, who has been very prolific in writing about the historical parallels between what's going on in the Russian invasion of Ukraine and what happened in the 1930s and 1940s with the German invasion of most of Europe and Russia's participation in the first stages of World War II. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Having an interesting conversation tonight with a gentleman from the United Kingdom who is a executive coach. He's an expert in business. He's writing his first book in that regard, and maybe we'll chat a little bit about that. Mark Smallwood is his name, but he's been prolific in writing quite a bit about the historical parallels between what was going on in the 1930s and early 1940s with both the steps toward World War II as well as World War II, and what's going on right now in Russia and Ukraine and around the world. We just talked, Mark, about the lack of support for Ukraine right now, particularly within the Republican conference of the U.S. Congress. And I was really interested to read a post that you wrote about the observing the Congress dysfunction draws dark parallels for you. Before World War II, over 30 U.S. officials exhibited treacherous behavior, aligning with Nazi interests. History is looking like it may repeat itself today. Putin's shadow looms large, reminiscence of many past manipulations. It's interesting because there was a fair amount of isolationism within the United States in the 1930s, and that may have come from some of the same things that you just mentioned about, the bad experience, obviously, with World War I. When we had numerous of the international institutions like the League of Nations that were established after World War I that fell into disrepair and not being used, and FDR, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president of the United States at the time, really had challenges in regards to supporting the United Kingdom and the war effort, so much so that he had to actually, some people think lie about it, but certainly, find ways around the rules. And he created that whole Lend-Lease program where he didn't actually give money, but he lent money and lent armaments to the United Kingdom and France, etc. But there was support. And what you're saying is that the sort of the isolationism and supporters of Nazism and Hitler that were in the United States in the 1930s might have some parallels to what's going on right now. So much so that, some people are calling it the Putin caucus of the Republican Party. Tell me what you think about this whole situation and what people like yourself, are doing by calling it out.
There has always been a vested self-interest. It is part of human nature to try and seek an advantage. So that in and of itself is not a radical surprise to anybody. I think where you see behavior that doesn't make sense. So, for example, the current US Speaker of the House, the Congress, his refusal to bring a vote on the Ukrainian aid package to the floor. So use of a technicality to stop what it appears to be the majority who would vote in favor. And if you look back to the split, and I can't give you the exact numbers, but when back before World War II, it was voted for, I think, close to 90% of the Democratic senators and congressmen voted for aid to the UK, and about 10% didn't, and close to 90% of the Republicans didn't, and 10% did. And the old story of follow the money rings true. Why is somebody not doing something? So without trying to conflate too many different issues, you hear I'd say the far extreme right of the GOP talking about an invasion on the southern borders of the US. There is no army sat on the southern borders of the US. There are no tanks, there are no missiles, there are no aircraft waiting to zoom over the border. There are a wave of humanity of questionable numbers who are trying to seek a better life by coming to America. But the use of the word invasion is a very emotive phrase when you're talking about your own security. And one of the things I realized through traveling throughout America over many years is a percentage of the population has a worldview, but it is not a large percentage. It is the more educated, more on the coasts. When you travel through the heartlands of America, people are worried about what's going on in their own town, maybe, in their region, maybe even in their state. So trying to get people to think about something that seems like a world away without realizing its direct impact on their life is quite difficult. For example, we will talk about democracy. Some Americans say, no, we're a constitutional republic, without recognizing that that's underpinned by absolutely democratic values. We're just talking about the semantics. So I think when you look at the sheer number of people who were, to lack of a better word, taking backhanders from, the Nazi governments, the German-American Bund, America First Committee, sounds very much to someone who's bothered to learn their history, like MAGA. There was an event, I think, in 1939 in Madison Square Gardens, where the write-up after it was, they called it the Nazi Christian Evangelical Support Group. Evangelical religion tends to gravitate towards non-factual responses. And the easiest way to get people to be scared is to terrify them. And if you talk to people about an invasion on your border, or, it's not a godly country, or, people's rights here, there, and other, these are all distractions. It's like watching reality TV over paying attention to what's going on in your life. It can distract you, and it distracts you from what's important. So I would imagine for people, I can only speak for myself, but I see other people who are also quite prolific about commenting on these issues. For me, it's really about, I think the best story I ever heard was many years ago. It was a training scenario, and it was a great example. And the story the trainer told was of a little girl walking along a beach that was completely covered with starfish that had washed out of the sea. And an adult saw that child pick that up, walk it back out and put it in the sea, and then come back and pick up another starfish and walk back out and put that in the sea. And they said, what are you doing? It can make no difference. And the little girl says it made a difference to that starfish. And I think whatever voice we can have, whatever each of us can do to convince somebody else that the right thing to do is to back a sovereign country that is defending itself against a brutal invasion, we all need to take steps to try and do that. And the easiest way to challenge is with facts, not opinion. Opinions can vary, but the facts remain the same. And the facts are Russia has started a war, of invasion. It is committing war crimes. It is using brutal tactics. just in the last few days, you'll have noticed that Ukraine has successfully destroyed a number of Russian aircraft. They attacked a drone factory, many hundreds of miles from their border, but they're attacking military targets. And then each morning you see that the Russians have bombed and attacked, an apartment block in a city. So they're attacking civilians. That's a terrorist state choice. And the Ukrainians are defending themselves with their own arms to the best of their ability by attacking military targets. And they've been very successful. They have sunk a significant proportion, many millions of pounds worth of the Russian fleet, despite not yet having the equipment they require. They are very effective at rebutting the advances the Russians make. But to do that, when people send waves of infantry at you, you require the volume of munitions, and that's what America can provide. We do not have the manufacturing capacity yet in Europe, and certainly don't have it in Ukraine to have the volume of munitions that are required to effectively repel waves and waves of invaders coming from Russia. And Russia are taking those people from poor countries. They are not really spending the lives of many Russians. They're spending the lives of many people they don't class as Russians, who are poor and come to Russia and end up on I don't think they've been completely lied to, but that's the cannon fodder Russia are using.
So that's it.
So for me,
you believe that most of the draftees or recruits or conscripts are not from Moscow or St. Petersburg. They're from more outlying areas of Russia or the associated countries. You talk about facts, and I found one of the passages in your most recent post really quite interesting, because you said that between 1941 and 1945, the Allies, including the United States, Great Britain, and Canada, provided unprecedented support to Stalin's regime to combat a greater evil. So this wasn't in total to all the Allied forces. This is just what was to one party. And this aid included 14,500 aircraft, 12,000 tanks, 450,000 jeeps and trucks, 13 billion to 14 billion. And you said that's close to 215 billion in today's dollars.
Yeah.
So
it's a vast amount
argument is that the money that we are currently either committing to and or potentially committing to Ukraine pales into comparison to the commitment that we provided to Great Britain, to the Allied forces, and to Russia when they were our allies in World War II. Is that correct?
I would absolutely stand by that. And that information is freely available if you look for it. One of the things I think that it's easy to do is, to talk about the cost of living, to talk about the cost of fuel, to talk about, inflation, to talk about all things that are relevant and matter. But if you look at the way first aiders or hospitals try and triage issues, if you are pumping blood out of an artery, they don't sit there and busy asking you how you feel. They deal with the fundamental issue first, and that fundamental is an issue of survival. Russia has proven under Putin, but again, I think a couple of years ago, I was given an anecdote by a good friend who's very experienced in Russia. And I think it was just after the initial renewed invasion in 2022. And I said, I can't understand why Russia would do this. It makes no sense. And he said, oh, well, you're not thinking like a Russian. And I went, what do you mean? And he told me a folk tale of a Russian woodcutter who goes in the woods and he chops down a tree, and out of that tree comes a genie and says, thank you for releasing me. I will grant you a single wish. So he thinks, and he's about to ask for his heart's desire. And the genie goes, but before I grant it, I'm just going to tell you that whatever I give to you, I will give twice over to your neighbors. So he thinks again, and then he says, please blind me in just one eye, which when you think about what that's about, it's about holding you back, not pushing you forward. If you had your wishes granted and your wishes were millions of pounds and your neighbors got many more millions of pounds, everyone's a winner. And that's how a lot of people would think. The psyche that you see exhibited consistently and the behavior you see exhibited consistently from the Nazis were ostensibly a gang of crooks and criminals who somehow, by breaking all the rules and playing on people's fears, and it took them a number of times to get elected before they were finally elected and then changed the rules. Himmler was a chicken farmer, to run it. They were a criminal enterprise. Goring was a industrialist crook. And if you look at Putin and those that are around him, it's very hard to see the difference. It is run like a crime family. It is not run like, a country. The sheer number of senior wealthy Russians who have accidentally tripped and slipped and fallen from a sixth-floor window over the last few years is vast. Their families have magically disappeared. So these are the behaviors of a mob. They are not the behaviors of a sovereign state. Unfortunately, that group are in charge of a sovereign state. But the Russians can't wash their hands, because the same way, if America elects someone who decides he wants to be a dictator, and you see one of the legislative arms of that country not acting in an impartial fashion, then America would be responsible for the changes that would take place within its own ethos. And that would be all Americans, including those that are silently saying, well, I don't really like Joe Biden. I don't like Donald Trump either, but I don't really like Joe Biden. Yeah, I can't argue with you, but at the end of the day, are we talking about bad or awful? To slip into politics, forgive me for a second, Brian. So I feel, I will cover a broad range of topics, but I feel most strongly that there is a evil regime, evil in the truest sense of the word, that is doing its best to eradicate a sovereign state and to eradicate Ukrainians. If you look at what Putin has said, nothing in there is about, yes, we just want to protect this, we want to protect that. They run elections where they basically remove the local population, ship in a load of Russians, video them looking happy, and then run an election with Russians voting for Russia in a different country. What a surprise that the majority of them vote for them being part of the Russian empire. So, yes.
You, in one of your posts, were very critical about Donald Trump and also Speaker Johnson in the United States, but also the Chancellor of Germany, and you said he had lost his way. And I think you're arguing that numerous different politicians in the Western world are not standing up the way that history, would suggest that they should, given your parallels.
I found myself having interesting, and I always try and respond to someone with respectfully and with facts. So interesting discussion, and someone who purported to be from America and purported, you never know, but purported to be an honest broker of who they said they were. I said, Ukraine should just roll over. And I said, well, if you think about parallels, this would be like someone has kicked down the front door of your house. They've murdered half your family. You're stood defending yourself on the stairs. And I, your neighbor, could help. But instead I'm going, well, I just want to fix my back fence first. And, can't you just accept they're going to live on your ground floor? And it may seem like an extreme parallel, but when you bring it down to an visceral, personal level, what else is there? This is a country who has been invaded. They have not, corruptly put Zelensky in charge. There were 40-odd million people. He's been voted in. This is not a country where he's won the election by 87% for the last 5 times. And when he wasn't president, he voted his best mate in just to be seen to be, competing. This is not a country who has sent its agents overseas and used nerve agents and chemical weapons to kill people. This is a country that is just wanting to exist. And the arguments you see that it's NATO's fault, NATO's a defensive alliance. Or the arguments you see that it's the Ukrainians' fault because, they provoked Russia. That's the same argument that an abuser will use about it's the woman's fault that he had to beat her up. So don't blame him because she was awful. So these things sicken. And I think when you see people like Donald Trump who may or may not have done something that exposes him to blackmail. What I can say about him is he certainly seems to admire people who can do whatever they want in the world with no checks and balances. And that is deeply disturbing to someone who enjoys living in a democracy. If I want to say something negative about my government, I don't expect people to be kicking down my front door late at night and dragging me off to be tortured. I expect, I may get some censure if it's too far past the line, but I like to live in an environment and a world where we can disagree and we don't have to be abusive to each other. But, when you look at how Congress is acting, how would they feel if Canada pushed over the border and took Wisconsin and Iowa, and everyone else just said, well, you guys should live with that, do peace with Canada, it's not that bad, which is a comparable situation. So the people who sit in these roles in America are not stupid. They are not unbright. There is something else going on around why they're doing that. And people who will do anything to hold on to power, or people who, may have exposed themselves to the sort of leverage that you wouldn't want to see in your public officials, that's really concerning. And I think it is okay to call them out. And if we don't call them out, we normalize that behavior. And that's, for me, morally reprehensible.
I agree with you completely, but the astounding thing to me is how many people appear to be willing to support those people that appear to do almost anything just to hold on to power. And you really wonder where the population is that doesn't see what you see and doesn't see that these individuals are only in it for self-interest, and not being willing to be judged by history and do the right thing. Anyway, we got to take a break for some messages. I'm going to come back with Mark Smallwood in just 2 minutes. Fascinating conversation about the historical parallels between the 1930s and 1940s and both the march toward World War II as well as World War II, with what's going on right now with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. Stay with us, everyone. Back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I came across a really interesting gentleman and prolific writer. Mark Smallwood is his name. He's coming to us from the United Kingdom, where he's a strategy director and executive coach. He talks about unleashing potential, driving success, transforming underperformance to high performance. And he's written numerous posts and articles about the historical comparison between what happened in the advent of World War II, the march toward World War II, and what's happening right now in Eastern Europe. And the parallels are frankly scary, and appeasement, which obviously Chamberlain did at Munich, versus what Donald Trump, Speaker Johnson, and other people are thinking about doing in the United States, and other people around the world. They're not the only ones. I think is really scary. Mark, I got to ask you, in one of your posts,
Please.
You said this is the start of World War III. Do you really believe that, sir?
I firmly believe that unless the West get our act together, that is where we stand. And the reason for that is, as we touched on earlier, that all bullies are at heart cowards, and they only understand strength. So each time, the old adage, you give them an inch and they take a mile, that is very much what goes on. If you look at all the potential friction points across the world, and without wanting to go into great detail about all of them, you have a deeply unstable situation going on in the Middle East. You have the tensions in Southeast Asia, China, Taiwan. Russia is shipping millions of ammunition, 155 millimeter artillery shells from North Korea. Russia has been arming terrorist groups, including the widely acknowledged terrorist group Hamas, for years. Russia and Iran are in cahoots. Iran, a regime that has zero respect for women's rights, and is sending their arms to Russia to rain down upon Ukraine, They've given them the factories, the facilities to do that. So if you look at why, without going into a conspiracy theory, why October the 7th happened on October the 7th, as opposed to the individual sniping between this group, that group, why Hamas poured into Israel, murdered more than 1,200 people on a single day, you have to say who really benefits from that. It's certainly not the Palestinian people. It's not the Israeli people. There is only one group that really benefits from that action, one nation that really benefits from that action, and that is Russia. So the likelihood, if you just sit there and think about what's going on, of Russia having a hand, even if they leveraged Iran, and Iran having a hand leveraging Hamas, the Houthis, to do what they are now doing throughout the Middle East, and the inevitable response that any country would have when you have the equivalent of the fox in the hen house, you have to look back for why that happened. And it can only lay with the stimulation of Russia wanting to distract the West. And if you look at the sheer amount of distraction that's going on with the terrible situation in the Middle East and the appalling loss of life on many sides, you have to say who benefited. And the primary benefiter from that is Russia. And whilst I do not have connections with the security services, and I draw my own conclusions from the information I see, that appears really clearly to me that they've had a hand in that. And when you look at that going on in the instability in the Middle East, when you look at an America internally focused, when you look at historical, I call them empires that have fallen apart over time. If you look at the disintegration, the fall of the Roman Empire, you look at what's going on with Western democracy at the moment, there is an awful amount of paralleling that will make you uncomfortable if you bothered to learn your history. So the issue is, longer term, we need to make sure that, you know, if you believe in democracy, you understand it's never free, that it does cost, that, you know, the ethos in World War II from the Allies was steel over flesh. The Russian was flesh over steel. We are forcing Ukraine to fight a war of flesh versus steel, which is, you know, we're destroying the flower of their youth. I have no empathy for the Russian side because, again, if Russia stops and leaves, this war ends today. If Ukraine stops, they disappear as a state. And we know from history what happens, and we know what's going on. They go to re-education centers, they're shipped all over, the country's taken, the resources are taken. And the only part of the Ukraine that the Russians really want is a bit where all the resources are, you know. So when I say I feel we are running in a parallel time to World War II, when our grandparents or great-grandparents, depending on our age, were living through their times, I'm pretty sure they weren't sitting there going, oh, we're about to roll into another war. You know, Hitler's just going to keep pushing his luck, and eventually he's going to go too far and, you know, roll into Czechoslovakia, and then it's all going to kick off. I think they were probably just sitting there, and he was just taking a bite at a time. And every time he got away with it, he thought, oh, I can do this a bit more. And I strongly feel that without the support the Allies gave to the Soviet Union, without the material support and the financial support they gave to the Soviet Union, at least Germany would have drawn the line at Moscow, and the Russians wouldn't have been able to come back because they didn't have the resources. And that would have fundamentally changed all of our lives. And I personally don't want to see that happening again, except with the Russians encroaching from the east, heading west. Because I live in the West. You know, I'm not so far from Russia compared to the US or Canada. It's a long way away. But you get past Ukraine, you begin to get into what were the old satellite states, and then you're heading into Western Europe.
So let's talk about that for a second. Some people think that Trump can end the war in a day, and most people think the way he would do that is by cutting off support, and so therefore immediately what would happen is Russia would take over eastern Ukraine. And he seems to think, or some people, that that analyze his solution seem to think that they think that that Russia will stop at, as you say, the part of Ukraine that's got all the resources. Other people think no, that if we if Trump or whoever allowed Russia to take over eastern Ukraine, it would only be the first step to taking all of Ukraine, and then the Baltics would be next. What's your assessment?
I would say the people that say they're not going to stop would be accurate. There may be a strategic pause while they rearm, rebuild, retrain, but why would they stop? You know, I sit there and go, Putin is an older man. You know, at some point soon, he's going to reach the end of his lifespan. And why do people have such hubris that they feel a need to dominate others with their will? I think for those that would say that about Donald Trump could stop it overnight, I would probably look at it a little differently. I would sit there and go, the only country that has ever invoked the Article of Mutual Defense from NATO is America. And they did it just after the 9/11 incidences back in 2001, I think it was. And without hesitation, this country went to war in Iraq, it went to war in Afghanistan with them, as did all of the other NATO states, sent troops, sent support. And they did that without hesitation because it was the right thing to do. Now, let's say Donald Trump does get into power and let's say he says, yeah, I'm not giving Ukraine any more money. And let's say that caused real problems and Ukraine had to, you know, stop or surrender or whatever the case may be. The next stage of this conflict rolls out, it will be a NATO member that gets attacked, and the US will, if they choose to honor that, then have to step forward and they will be in a shooting war. Or they can send money and munitions now and have somebody else do the shooting for them, not the flower of their youth. So it seems absolutely inane, without being a warmonger and thinking war is good, which is the furthest from a thought. As I said, a grandfather who spent 10 months in a German prisoner of war camp during World War II. He fought as a paratrooper in Holland. But it's inane to think that we wouldn't support a country that is fighting for its existence against a country that is absolutely looking to fight a war of conquest and domination, a colonial style war. But all the arguments you see in the press are, you know, we're colonial, we're this. Russia has a tremendously effective propaganda machine. My posts attract an awful lot of attention from that propaganda machine. Ultimately, you just have to answer with facts or block them. Because it's really an information war, Brian, and it's about getting people to focus on the bits that matter, not the soundbite. It's very easy to distract people in the modern age. And I feel each one of us who has the voice or the interest or the opportunity or the audience to challenge those misconceptions, morally, that's the least we can do. I don't have to go and lie in the woods in eastern Ukraine fighting, you know, for my family's life. But if here where I live in the UK, we're invaded, that's exactly what I would be doing. And why wouldn't we support a country that's trying to do that when they share so many of our values?
We're chatting tonight with Mark Smallwood. He is a executive coach. He's a prolific writer of posts and articles about the historical comparison between 1930s, 1940s, World War II, Nazi Germany, and what's going on in Eastern Europe with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments with Mark Smallwood from the UK tonight in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a really interesting conversation tonight with Mark Smallwood. Mark is an executive coach in UK, the United Kingdom. He's obviously a real student of history. He's got an MBA. I've got a long list of accomplishments and activities in a 30-year career being an executive coach I could go through, but that's not the topic for tonight. The topic for tonight is his historical comparisons between what happened in the 1930s and 1940s in the run-up of to World War II, and the funding of Russia when they were our ally in World War II, to what's going on in Eastern Europe today with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the similar kinds of isolationism within the United States and, frankly, parts of North America and the Western world, and lack of support to Ukraine, or not the support that they probably deserve, and what was happening in World War II. Mark, in closing, I want to ask you, Nikki Haley, who is a presidential candidate for the Republican nomination, was really saying this was calling for not a sales job, but she said no one is out there really telling people why this is such an important fight, and why, if we don't arm Ukraine, then we're going to be putting American lives at risk. And right now, by giving them money and giving them armaments, we are actually saving American lives. Do you agree with that? And if you were that person that Nikki Haley said was out there making that argument, what would you be telling the American people, the Canadian people, the British people today?
I agree 100% with the point she was making. I felt she was pushing against an entrenched group who clearly didn't want her to be standing at the fore, and you have to ask yourself why. I think what I would be saying if I was trying to convince people is think back to your days in school. Think back to every single one of us encountered a bully, slipped into bullying, understood that, I don't mean the person that walks around with the biggest stick, but understand that every time you hand over your lunch money, it's not that they stop, they come and they want more. So unless Ukraine are successful in repelling this war of aggression from Russia, other areas of the world will flare. And some of those areas, American, Canadian, you name it, troops will have to go on the ground, and those conflicts will be bigger. Russia has rattled its nuclear saber so many times, I don't feel it holds water. I do, however, believe that China would have a different viewpoint on it. And if a dictator sees another dictator get away with a war of conquest, it is not unfeasible that they will sit there and think, oh, I will try that too. They didn't bother stepping up then, they will try it too. And we have historical parallels of that, not just in World War II, but you can go back through the centuries to see each time someone has tried to make a concession with someone who does not operate on the same values-based system you operate on, it goes horrendously wrong. So to avoid America fighting a much bigger war, to avoid the Western democracies fighting a much bigger war, to avoid us getting dragged into a conflict that really could cost the earth, Ukraine requires backing more now, and it requires us not to tie its hands behind its back. There is no point giving someone a missile that could strike logistics, exactly what we would do if we were fighting a war 100 miles behind the front line, and say, yes, but you can't use that weapon for this, you can't use it for that. And that was my problem with the German Chancellor. They have the weaponry they could give, they're part of Europe, it has been voted to give, and they're going, we don't want to escalate. You're already in the fight, it's not a nuclear escalation. Give the country the arms they require to defend themselves. And for anyone who has any concerns, actually read your history. Look at what the left-leaning media says. Look at what the right media says. If you have to look on Wikipedia, look further afield. Learn your history, make your own decisions, and support Ukraine.
Mark Smallwood, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you very much for your posts and articles. I've enjoyed reading them. And I think you are having a positive impact. And if nothing else, what you're saying to everyone is read your history, because if you don't read your history, history tends to repeat itself, as has been often quoted. So thank you very much for reminding us all of that and cautioning us. And I agree with you completely. I think that this, if we don't take action, could accelerate and into something terrible. I'm not sure if it's World War III, but it certainly could be. And I think that the German Chancellor, he learned the wrong lesson from history. He actually should be taking the opposite attitude, which is completely arming Ukraine. And that would actually suggest that there's not escalation But doing what he's doing, I really worry, means that by definition, there will be escalation in the future, because I don't think Putin will stop at Eastern Ukraine. Anyway, Mark Smallwood, thank you so much for joining us. That's our show for today, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every night at 6 p.m. on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca, even from the UK. And all my podcasts and videos get posted on social media the minute that my show goes to air. You can get those on briancrombie.com, on Facebook, Instagram, wherever, YouTube, etc. And all my podcasts are posted wherever good podcasts are posted. Thanks for joining us, Mark Sullivan. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.